So welcome to this event on pathways to breathe clean air. My name is Ashfaq Khalfan. I'm the director of the Sustainability Regulation Observatory here at LSE. I'm stepping in for Joanna Setzer, who unfortunately couldn't join us because of an unavoidable circumstance. This event is co-organized by several organizations, the Global School of Sustainability at LSE, the Law School, the Grantham Research Institute, and of course the UN Special Rapporteur on the human right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment, the Laboratorio por Justicia Ambiental y Climática at the Universidad Iberoamericana, Ciudad de Mexico, Queen Mary University of London, and Imperial College London. So it's the three London universities working together on this. So it feels particularly important to have this discussion now when the science on air pollution and the necessary policies and measures to address them have never been clearer. And yet the political response in some parts of the world is moving in the opposite direction. Most people worldwide still breathe air that is unsafe, with air pollution contributing to roughly 8 million premature deaths per year. These harms fall disproportionately on children, pregnant people, older persons and communities also facing environmental injustice. So next month, the UN Special Rapporteur will present to the Human Rights Council her report on air pollution and its impacts on human rights. We get a special preview here today. And it hopefully will help address some of the challenges we are seeing. 2 weeks ago, the United States repealed the endangerment finding, the scientific determination that greenhouse gases and air pollution endanger public health, and which form the bedrock, the legal basis for air quality and climate regulations in the United States. So it removed the federal obligation to limit pollution levels, despite the overwhelming scientific consensus, including in the US, that the evidence linking pollution to harm is beyond scientific dispute. Of course, at the state level, several states are going in the opposite direction, and one of the actual ironies is that this action may actually empower California to reinstate its own air quality regulations. So there is some hope and some resistance to some of these negative steps. The Special Rapporteur's report is unequivocal that the drivers of air pollution are human-made and preventable, and effective solutions already exist, which she will cover in her presentation. So we're very fortunate to have a distinguished panel. I'll introduce them one by one as they speak up. So as they come up to speak. So thank you everybody for being here with this panel. There'll be an opportunity for questions for people in the room and online, and a good amount of time for that. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Astrid Puentes-Riano, the UN Special Rapporteur. In addition to, because it's a part-time job and unpaid, it's pro bono. She's also she also teaches at the Berta Cáceres Environmental Justice Clinic at the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. And she has more than 20 years of experience in this field. So Astrid, when you come up, the question for you is how do human rights, particularly human rights that is health-based and intersectional, change the way states should design and implement clean air policies such as ultra-low emission zones, especially to protect children and marginalized people? The second question, well, actually, just one question, that's a big enough question. Thank you.
The right to a healthy environment. We talk about safe climate. Let me start, of course, with clean air as an essential element, of course, of the right to a healthy environment, but is also interlinked with safe climate, safe and sufficient water, healthy biodiversity and ecosystems, non-toxic environments, and healthy and sustainable food. And one of the key aspects also of the human rights approach and the human rights to a healthy environment is that all of these elements are interlinked and interconnected, which means that we do not have and should not have to pick one element over the other, because all of these are interconnected and important. And in addition to the procedural elements, access to information, public participation, and access to justice. And all of these are interlinked with other human rights. But why I decided also to do this report? It's not working. Yeah, because it worked before. Thank you. And this is very, there's a lot of text. But basically, in the summary is because it's talking about clean air is important only when we breathe. So if we take a deep breath, every time that we're taking a breath, whether we're aware or not, that is when breathing clean air is important. So of course we need clean air to live, but to live a healthy life. As we mentioned and as we know, states have an obligation to protect human rights, specifically the right to a healthy environment. And there is a lot of information scientifically proved that today we have a public health crisis because 99% of people worldwide are breathing polluted air or air that is not aligned with the World Health Organization guidelines of what clean air is. And of course, this is not about the policy. This is about our lives. One of the maybe painful or controversial things that I also invite us all to do is make it personal and think about whether us or someone in our family have been injured or unhealthy or has passed away because of air pollution. And of course, we have here Rosamond, Ella's mom, who's the first person, Ella, to have in the death certificate. Ella was a 9-year-old from London, as you probably don't know, that passed away in 2013. And today is the only person that in her death certificate has that she passed away and her asthma was because of air pollution. There are millions of people in the same situation. And as we also heard, this is completely preventable. One of the key aspects there is that we have to implement the obligation from states and businesses to tackle the main drivers. And this is one of the key things that I would like to highlight in the report. As this presentation as well, I am very honored to have a lot of people also online. And the report, the idea as mandate holders, what we have is the role to advise states, but also other stakeholders to understand that we are in a crisis, but how we can solve this crisis. Air pollution also is a transboundary issue. It, of course, air and the pollution in the air doesn't stay here. I just came from Ireland where I did an official visit. And of course, there's a lot of issues, transboundary issues, both in Ireland and Northern Ireland, but also in other places. Let's think about fires in the Amazon, of course, that also is impacting, having transboundary impacts. Or the fires in Canada that a few years ago, well, there has been unfortunately a lot, but has a lot of impacts. The other thing that I want to highlight is how much air pollution impacts all organs of our body. And it is really painful. It's difficult to deal with this, but I really want to help to, and we will, of course, hear from scientists and different, even artists, of course, how to deal with this. But air pollution is not only a matter of our lungs. It impacts every organ in our body. And this is a graphic from a report that was prepared recently, Cradle to Grave, and I'm using it, of course, with their permission, because it helps us to understand how it is linked. And it's linked air pollution, and it has impact in all stages of our life, since we are in uterus and throughout our lives, including at the end of our lives, the ones that are blessed enough to live until we're elder. Air pollution is increasing risks on dementia and even on osteoporosis for us that, I mean, I turned 50 last year, and a lot of us that, of course, we are very young still, but air pollution is increasing risks to osteoporosis, dementia, strokes, heart attacks. So it's not something that is an invention, it's completely proved already by science. So this should move us. We also today have the obligation of states, a clarity on obligations that we didn't have before. My predecessor in 2019, David Boyd, did a report on air pollution and clean air. And I wanted to reanalyze the issue under also the clarity under international law. Last year, we had the advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice in The Hague. We cannot go higher than the ICJ in The Hague. And the ICJ was very clear to conclude that the obligation of states to protect the environment and the climate system. And that is customary international law, which means that every state has this obligation, doesn't matter whether they ratify or not treaties, or whether they stay in treaties or they denounce the treaties. And this is key because it's an obligation that is erga omnes. Every state has this obligation, and this also includes the obligation to regulate and monitor activities that can be causing these impacts. But of course, we have to talk about drivers, and businesses in that sense also have the obligation to comply with regulations, to support, to provide information in relation to their businesses. One of the things that I found out preparing the report, and more I confirm, is the unfortunate negative lobbying that businesses and some businesses are doing to prevent improvement of air quality measurements and monitoring and better regulations. We have to stop that, because it's not about a business or whether better air quality measures benefit or can impact a business. It's about our life and our health. So that is also one of the key aspects to strengthen the obligation and the human rights perspective. But we also have, and this is fortunately something that the ICJ advisory opinion talk about, increasing and continuous subsidizing fossil fuels can be a violation of international law. And you have here the numbers. We have trillions of dollars over the last few years that are subsidizing fossil fuel, while there's a very little amount, 3 billion, invested on outdoor pollution. But there are billions of dollars, of course, also because of the impact of air pollution. And as we know, this is not an economic equation. This is about life and the protection of human rights. But also from the economic perspective, it makes sense. This is a very not great slide, especially for those that are in the room, we can't see. But basically, and I will end with this, what do we need to do? We need to act. We need to use the law, the science, and the power of people to advance the solutions that we are not doing. And I wanted to use an example. Of course, it is not perfect, but it has showed that it's useful, the ultra low emissions zones in London. That has been difficult, has had a lot of criticism, but that was established in London with the idea to improve air quality. And today, and we will hear about that later also, with scientists following up the impacts of those kinds of measures, it is shown that it has helped, especially for the health of children. And this is the kind of regulations that we need to have, not to consider only the technical perspectives and the environmental perspective, but the human rights perspective, and especially the risk and the impact of those that are more vulnerable: children, elder, women, people in situations in poverty, because it also has been proved that when we talk about air pollution, we also talk about inequalities, which is an obligation of states to advance policies that advance equity and equality and are non-discriminatory. And the policies that we have today, if that is not taken into consideration, it is, of course, an important in practice, an inequality that is increasing. So I will leave it there. There are in the report conclusions and recommendations for states and cities. And I thank you for this space. Look forward for this conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, Esther. That was brilliant. So we'll turn to our next panelist, who is Suzanne Bartington. She's a clinical associate professor in environmental health at the University of Birmingham. Her research is on health impacts of air pollution, environmental public policy, and sustainable development. So, Professor Bartington, two questions for you. One is drawing on your clinical and research experience. How does air pollution affect respiratory health across the life course? And from a public health and medical perspective, what actions should governments prioritize to reduce air pollution and prevent avoidable health harms? And how can health evidence better inform clean air policy?
Thank you. And thank you very much to the organisers for the invitation as well. As we've already heard, my work focuses on the health impacts of air pollution. And this really started when I was a medical student. And part of that question was clinical experience. And that is something you really experience as a final year medical student going out to actually see practice. And this elective took me to Janakpur in southern Nepal, near the Indian border, where I worked in homes measuring air pollutants for women who are cooking using biomass fuel. And I found it absolutely extraordinary that about half of the world's population still cook in this way, using solid biomass fuels, heavily polluting particulates that can go into the thousands of micrograms per meters cubed in kitchen environments such as this shown on the right of the screen here, with a mother hunched over the stove making the evening meal. More recently, some of my work has taken me to sub-Saharan Africa. We can see in the centre here, that's actually a canteen in a university in Rwanda, where we did a piece of work exploring exposure for occupational staff in kitchen environments who are, again, cooking using charcoal and wood. So that was really the start of my journey. And to add to that, what I could see in the wards on that clinical experience in Nepal was young women in their 30s or 40s with chronic lung disease, COPD, advanced COPD, who are non-smokers. And clearly there's a link through from those intense exposures for long durations. So we touched on this already. I know the question was about respiratory health impacts of air pollution, but I think it's really important to take this beyond the respiratory system. We already heard about the impacts of air pollution on every organ of the body. A study published from Denmark last year linked air pollution to over 700 diseases using primary care records. Now, only a subset of those are currently causally associated in a way in which we can quantify those health impacts in a reliable way. But we're aware the evidence is expanding all of the time, and it's growing. I think also importantly to make the case that, again, shown on the right of the screen here, we talk a lot in clinical medicine about the clinical iceberg, and we see what presents to us at the tip of that iceberg. And that's also what we record. So what we record in hospital records, in deaths, in disease outcomes, is what is presented through clinics. But below that, below the clinical iceberg, there's a vast impact of air pollution on all of us. We already spoke about some of those figures worldwide, and of course, all of us rely on breathing for life. Those physiological and subclinical effects that we're really only just beginning to fully understand the way in which they contribute in a way to longer term disease risks. So this is something that affects everyone throughout the life course and goes beyond what we just measure and quantify in figures. I think just to briefly say, without digging into the data in a 5-minute contribution, at present, legislative limit values are out of step with the health evidence base. So the World Health Organization updated the global air quality guidelines in 2021, drawing on that expanse of evidence, and really presented those far more stringent guidelines, but also stated that there is no safe limit to air pollution and health effects are detectable at low concentrations. So it's really important we think about incremental gains and gains below legislative values, including those that are currently in place in advanced economies. And again, coming back to the individual, I know we have Rosamund here today. The tragic death of Ella Adekosadebe really brought that spotlight on the individual level to what this does to people's lives, and such a tragic loss. It's so important that we take that forward in terms of acting on that. And to add as well, that another tragic case of our Ishak, who died due to spore-forming moulds in Rochdale, home in Rochdale, which again in the UK setting set a spotlight on the conditions of people's homes. And again, we're really shifting the evidence base now towards the importance of researching indoor as well as ambient pollution. Finally, just to touch on those health inequalities, I started off by discussing women who cook with biomass fuel, and we know the impacts of biomass globally predominantly fall on women and young children because they're typically in those environments and have the highest exposure levels. But just drawing on some data from the UK, we, together with the Royal College of Physicians, published a report, A Breath of Fresh Air, last year, which brought together the most recent evidence on these impacts, including on health inequalities. And this report very clearly demonstrated the inequities that exist between those who are living in the most deprived areas in England and the least deprived areas, with both the highest concentrations in those most deprived areas, but also evidence that actually those people are on average emitting less in terms of pollutant emissions. So there's a real inherent inequity in terms of who is experiencing the greatest burden versus who is contributing the most in terms of pollution. I was asked, as the second final part of the question was a public health approach. So I'm trained as a public health doctor, and I think it's important to say that the definition of public health is promoting health essentially through the organised efforts. And it's both a science and an arts. And I'm really pleased that we have both scientific and artistic contributions here today, because we need that breadth. We need both to address this challenge. Shown here is that what we call the hierarchy of interventions. And we know from all of the experience and evidence there is on the efficacy of interventions that it is those well-organised, well-coordinated interventions backed up by robust legislation that achieve the greatest gains. So rather than just asking people to change their behaviour, we really, really need to bring in the processes and the structures around it such that that is achieved in a coordinated way. And of course, the London Ultra Low Emission Zone, which we'll hear more about, is an example of that. But we need to future-proof those interventions. We know that the example of low emission zones, we know that vehicle technology is evolving. We need to future-proof them, and we need to capitalise on the wider co-benefits as well, such as physical inactivity, and we certainly need to do that with all the efforts to mitigate climate emissions and address the big challenge we have ahead as well of climate resilience. I'll stop there because I know my 5 minutes are up, so thank you very much, and I'll just leave details of the UK Clean Air programme.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Barrington. We'll now move to, I spoke about engagement finding, and we'll now move to President Trump's favorite authority outside the United States, the Greater London Authority. So, to Debbie Obafemi. She currently leads the authority's air quality team, and which is responsible for developing policies and coordinating delivery of air quality improvement programs across London, working with a range of other stakeholders. So,
Thank you.
5 minutes.
Thank you. How do I press it? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for that introduction. It's really good to have the ladies before me setting the scene as to why some of these policies that we've introduced in London are so important. But I really just want to, again, emphasize the background behind the ultra low emission zone. It's there's no doubt that it's a really important policy, especially to address the most the biggest source of pollution in London, which is transport emissions. So transport contributes around half of nitrogen dioxide emissions in London. And that is why the ULEZ is a policy-based, evidence-based policy. Sorry, it's an evidence data-based policy, really targeting where the problem is biggest. And on top of that, without just focusing on air quality, we've had how high pollution impacts the health, especially of those who are most vulnerable in our society. And just to give you a snapshot of London, and that data that shows how many Londoners live with asthma, nearly 500,000. And the latest evidence we had published in 2019 showed that around 4,000 deaths were attributed to poor air quality. So here, on that question of the benefits of the ULEZ, as I said, this is a data evidence-based policy, and a lot of the work we do is collecting evidence to inform the decisions that we take. Since its introduction in 2019, we have a really good database, air quality monitoring undertaken by local authorities in London that helps us to assess where the problems are and also how the policy is having an effect. And you can see from those slides that the picture in London has changed considerably, thanks in part to the ULEZ, but also other policies that are lesser known, together contributing to the improvements we've seen. Based on the latest London Atmospheric Inventory, that is the database we use to collect data from across London, we've seen at least 22% reduction in nitrogen dioxide just between 2019 and 2022. And when we look even backwards from 2016, when the mayor first took office, there's been almost half 50% reduction in nitrogen dioxide. So there's no doubt that these policies work, however difficult they might be. Just to point out something that's already been highlighted, although these local policies are really important for addressing nitrogen dioxide, when it comes to fine particulate matter, again, one of the most dangerous pollutants, local measures alone are not as effective. And so these are transboundary pollutants. And that's why the work that we do with other cities, with other regions is really important, because London on its own cannot solve the problem. And in fact, last year we had 3 episodes of high pollution. 2 of those were linked to particulate matter, and that was greatly linked to pollution from the continent. So it's really important that we work together with other cities and other regions. Again, looking at how we've progressed. Again, last year we published the ULEZ one-year-on report, and that data again emphasized the impact that just the expansion of the ULEZ has had between 2023 and 2024, 27% reduction in nitrogen dioxide, and most importantly, that translated to reduction in exposure of people to air pollution. And really, one of the most important parts of that as well is that the benefits of the ULEZ are greatly shown in areas in London of high deprivation. So Londoners who live in deprived areas and are disproportionately affected by air pollution have seen the greatest benefit of the ULEZ. And that really emphasizes why this is important. And of course, some of you might have seen that last year we had an announcement from DEFRA, which showed that London met legal limits for nitrogen dioxide for the first time. And again, that is a culmination of all this work that has been undertaken over the years, including the ultra-low emission zone. But as Suzanne has pointed out, and Astrid, the UK legal limits are much higher than World Health Organization's limits targets. So the mayor has emphasized that this is just the beginning. We are working and aim to achieve World Health Organization limits. So the work is still ongoing. The second question was around what lessons other cities can take from London. And I'm going to go through these really quickly. But first and foremost, it's really important to use data and research to demonstrate why action is needed. And the ULEZ has been a good example of how that has been the case, using data, using research by world-leading research organizations, including Imperial College in London. They have really done a good job in demonstrating why this work is important, but also being able to link not just improvements in air quality, but how that translates into health improvements for Londoners and impact on the economy. So that's really important to make that link. Secondly, the other lesson we've learned is around the importance of acknowledging and mitigating the impact of policy. So there is no policy that has no impact, and it's really important as policymakers that we take time to consult with the people that we deliver these policies for, understand the limitations, and where feasible, mitigate. So for example, the ULEZ had a scrappage scheme and various other measures to support those that were most impacted, including small businesses and disabled people who needed to use their vehicles but did not have the means to change to cleaner vehicles. So those mitigation measures are really important. Secondly, the third one is around taking proportionate action. So with ULEZ being a data evidence-based policy, we had to demonstrate why it had to happen in different parts of London. So we started with central London where air pollution was highest, and that was gradually extended from 2019 to 2021, and then eventually expanded to outer London in 2023. So starting with where the problem was greatest and gradually expanding the policy, but also learning along the way, as opposed to taking it all in one go. It has really been important to learn those lessons along the way during the course of expansion. And the final one is around, and it's definitely not the last one, because actually communication has to happen from the start. During the consult, to consult on any measures planned. It has to happen during implementation, and most importantly, it has to happen following implementation, so that we continue to carry people along, so they can see the benefits, so we can show that data. So I mentioned that we published a ULEZ one-year report to demonstrate how this is actually working. And I think that's really important to show that what we've done is working and it's important. However, that cannot be done without working with allies. So in London, communication is not just about talking about the benefits, but also tackling misinformation, which has been the biggest challenge for our work of introducing the ULEZ. So communication before, during, and after, but also working with our allies, people who are able to reach audiences that are not our natural audiences. As policymakers sitting behind the desk, there are so many other parts of our community that we can engage and influence through our allies. Organizations like Mums for Lungs, but also researchers in there. And we also worked with GPs. So really, really important to make use of our allies in spreading the positive benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. These are very useful lessons. And thank you for already teeing up the next speaker, Hartshorn, who founded Mums for Lungs, a grassroots network of parents and other campaigners against air pollution and for children's health. And she did that while she was on parental leave. So if you speak from there, speak from there. Okay. So a couple of quick questions for you. How has CSO advocacy and civil society advocacy influenced measures such as ULEZ, and what policies and actions do governments need to take to address the challenge?
Thank you for those questions, and thank you for that very kind shout out. With the confidence of that shout out, I would like to say that I think civil society action in London has been crucial to develop and deliver the ULEZ. I've been campaigning with the group I founded, as you said, on parental leave for almost 9 years now. And we are supported by hundreds of people across the country and by very many volunteers in London from all walks of life. There's no need to be a mum or to be a parent even to be involved with Mums for Lungs. What you need to have in common with us is that you want to reduce air pollution at the source because of the health. But the reality is lots of people are driven by the concern for their children. And I think that is also the real power of civil society engagement. When we look across the world, there's many movements that have started like that. There's Stop the Kindermorden campaigns in the Netherlands. There have been huge climate movements, obviously, powered by young people. And we all know of other campaigns, you know, when we think of tree planting in many parts of Africa and so on, that have been really driven by mums and by women. I think the point we can really bring across is that we can raise awareness of the respective issue, we can humanize statistics, and we bring a different kind of voice and message into the discussions, especially in times like we have now, where the political person is not always trusted that much, where they get inundated with mistrust, where there's a lot of misinformation going around. I think the parent, the civil society person, the person who clearly has nothing on the agenda apart from caring about the issue, brings a very needed and very important message across. So I think many people in London and beyond have heard about statistics about air pollution. But as humans, especially when a measure that is needed impacts our own lives, our mobility, the way we cook, the way we heat our homes, we're always very minded to think it can't be that bad. It won't impact me. It won't impact my children. They are probably overestimating the issue, but right here where I live, it's not going to happen. And I think that is a very human thing. But if it is your neighbor, your friend, the head teacher, or someone who just looks like, you know, the local shopkeeper or the mum you might know from a baby class, it suddenly brings the issue home. If there are lots of people speaking out and saying, this is impacting my children, or I worry about what this might already be doing to my own health, it suddenly feels like an issue that could impact you yourself. And that is, I think, where a diversity of voices, but also, frankly, the mum and the parent from next door really comes in. I think there's also a lot of schemes that are sort of really critical to starting clean air action. I often think of School Streets, which is a scheme whereby the road next to a school is closed at drop-off and pick-up times. Those kind of small localized schemes, or pedestrianisation of a small local high street and things like that, car-free Sundays, they do not work. They will not start without buy-in from the local people. You cannot have a school street if all the parents hate it, if the head teacher thinks it's a nonsense idea. The local council is just not going to do it. So I think there is a lot of schemes, especially at the really local level, that then perhaps broaden the mind and the ideas and provide an evidence base for bigger schemes where the local buy-in is absolutely critical. I'm just looking at my notes here. I had lots of very, insightful thoughts on the way here, and I'm just going to check that I'm ticking them all off. So, generally the theory of Mums for Lungs, the theory of change we have, the way we work, is exactly rooted in this idea that a breadth of messengers is needed to push for action. We're now seeing that there has been hundreds of illnesses, as Suzanne mentioned, linked to air pollution, and yet we're not seeing enough action at government level. So there is clearly something missing. The evidence itself is not making the argument. We had this amazing report by the Royal College of Physicians that outlined that the cost to the economy and wider costs to the UK each year are £27 billion. The UK is currently struggling financially, and there's, whatever you want as a campaigner, there's not enough money for the NHS, and so on. And it feels like it's an obvious one: save money on air pollution, and we could afford the best schools and very many changes. But still, that is not quite linking to air pollution. So what we with Mums for Lungs, and I know lots of other groups on the ground are trying, is to sort of raise awareness and breadth of the issue, get more people asking for more change, speaking in the media for more change, getting the local authorities to do small actions that they can at their local level and raise awareness through their channels as well, which will then hopefully translate to more people joining a movement, putting pressure on MPs who then go further up to government. So that's sort of our theory of change. And I like to think it works, but it's not yet proven until we see a massive shift in a reduction of the main sources of air pollution in this country, which obviously includes mobility. So driving, I'd like to see diesel vehicles of all sorts really phased out at a much quicker speed than is currently happening. We need changes clearly to heating. I mean, there's really no justification in this country for the vast majority of people to be heating their homes with wood, which is highly polluting, unsustainable from a climate perspective, and really unhelpful for the neighbours as well. And we would like to see much clearer interventions of reducing much more driving outside schools, nurseries, hospitals, that kind of places where people go who are already vulnerable, and yet they have, cars idling and other cars speeding past. That's just ridiculous. But I think the biggest problem we are seeing in the country is that we need a much bigger movement of education and people speaking out. And we need them from all walks of life. We need much more political leaders speaking out. We need much more health leaders, health messengers, the GP and the nurse speaking out. And that's why it's so brilliant that Suzanne is here, and she is working on all of that, obviously. And we just need a sort of much broader base of understanding of air pollution, that it impacts and affects us all. And I think civil society has a crucial role in playing there, because we do have a wide network. All of us go to schools, we speak at people, we have climate groups. I'm looking at some amazing climate campaigners opposite me here. And all these networks can come together and need to come together to see much broader change.
Thank you very much. So now we'll move on to talking about art, and to Dryden Goodwin, whose ongoing public art series, Breathe, 2012 to 2026, has spanned multi-site installations across London, the UK, and more, with over 2,000 drawings of teen air activists. And so Dryden will be asking you to talk about how art can help build the argument, and how, and to also ask you how artistic practice can contribute to policy conversations.
Thank you. I'd like to. Oh yes. I need to just to apologise. We're not able to show the images online because I'm showing some animations, and they wouldn't convert to showing online, but hopefully you can get a sense of what I'm talking about from what I'm saying. So I'd like to first thank you for the invitation, and I'd like to respond to the questions by telling the story of Breathe, the research for which began in 2010, when through the arts science organisation Invisible Dust, who are the project's commissioners and producers, I was introduced to Professor Frank Kelly, a key health advisor to the government on air pollution. My conversations with Frank formed the fundaments of the work that I wanted to make. He revealed the deep vulnerability of young developing bodies to the harmful effects of air pollution. When making the over 1,300 drawings of my youngest son, who was 5 at the time, I felt I was literally drawing breath into his body, trying to sustain him. For my studio, there was this shift in scale. In 2012, the animation was projected onto an 8-metre high screen on the top of Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, looking across the Thames towards the Houses of Parliament, one of the Western world's most powerful institutions, whose laws decide the quality of air he breathes. air that could both sustain him and corrupt his body. These fragile drawn lines become an urgent carrier of this information, a calling to account of the Houses of Parliament. I wanted to induce a heightened, embodied consciousness about the act of breathing. Ten years on, I revisited Breathe. I was commissioned for Lewisham London Borough of Culture, again working with invisible dust. I created a new body of over 1,300 drawings. This time, I decided to draw 6 local clean air activists and residents from my home borough of Lewisham, each literally and metaphorically fighting for breath. My local borough became central to the UK's air pollution crisis. These drawings are of Rosamond Adukisi Deborah CBE, whose 9-year-old daughter Ella died in 2013 after asthma attacks caused by pollution from the South Circular Road. Rosamond's campaigning led to the 2020 ruling naming air pollution as the cause of death for the first time. Rosamond continues working with MPs to try to pass Ella's law, aiming to enshrine the right to breathe clean air into UK law. Over the course of the year, the drawings of these clean air activists manifest in different forms, taking over bridges, buildings, and billboards. Essential to Breathe is the tension between movement and stillness, fundamental to animation, but also fundamental to the act of breathing. These zoetropic sequences of people struggling to breathe became animated when people moved past by car, by bus, and walking. Amid the disrupted, turbulent acoustics next to busy roads and air that carried the taste of pollution, all contributing to activating the meaning of the work. Breathe started to spread across London, such as this 80-metre installation on Euston Road. Then invited by JC Decaux to be shown on hundreds of digital screens next to arterial roads. Also short animations appearing at many train stations and multiple locations across the UK. Another staging post was the finale of the Lewisham Borough of Culture, where the large-scale projection of the animation was projected onto the old Lewisham Town Hall next to the South Circular. I hope you can hear me over the sound of the traffic. Like a bat signal shining across the city. Viewing figures from JC Decaux indicated that at this point, the different iterations of the project had already been seen by more than 13 million people. Then in February 2023, on the South Bank in London, marking the 10-year anniversary of Ella's passing, was Breathe for Ella. All present, pushing to bring about further systemic change to the quality of the air that we breathe. I experience drawing as an act of empathy, wanting to gain insight into another person's life, their story. As I follow the rhythms of their breathing, it feels like I'm reaching out, sensing myself in relation to them. Creating over 1,300 drawings was challenging, but what galvanized me was that the animation would become more than the sum of its parts. A metaphor for the essential collective action needed to secure a clean air future. Because we all don't breathe the same air, empathy will be essential if we're to make the changes needed locally, globally, and then the decisions made by our leaders. In 2024, I was invited to show Breathe at the Lahore Biennale in Pakistan, in one of the world's most polluted megacities. Adding to the others, I made over 230 drawings of local clean air activist Abid Omar, founder of the Pakistan Air Quality Initiative. The work appeared across the city on 1,500 digital billboards, hundreds of paper posters, and at a historic site. Breathe in Lahore started to link a global community of clean air activists urgently pushing for change. Breathe works to resonate not only through the animation itself, but through the method of animating the city and building alliances. With Lucy Wood, the producer at Invisible Dust, we've worked with transport networks, scientists, research institutes, campaigners, advocacy groups, policymakers, councils, businesses, legal voices, and educators to help push this conversation forward, including at the Arnold Schwarzenegger's Austrian World Summit in 2024, alongside Rosamund as well. Or engaging religious-based communities, animating dialogues between the climate and faith, for example, at Salisbury Cathedral. I wanted to finish with these images of posters after a year of being on the walls in Lewisham, as if a litmus test reflecting the state of the air back to us, emphasizing all our vulnerabilities, showing the accumulation of insidious particles of pollution, showing us how air sustains but also can corrupt us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll return to Dr. Chris Griffiths, who is a professor of primary care at the University of Oxford and Queen Mary University as well. And he's the director of the Center for, he's also the director of the Center for Applied Respiratory Research, Innovation, and Implementation. Dr. Griffiths, a question for you is, what does the scientific evidence tell us about the life course impacts of air pollution? And how can international commitments of clean air and climate be translated into effective national and local action?
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Astrid, for inviting us all here. It's a privilege to be here. I'm also a pleasure to present on behalf of the Chill Study team, who've put actually decades, in some cases, of work into our project. So we've heard already about the life course impacts of air pollution, but these particularly affect children and the vulnerable. So this is a slide from the work of Hannah Bugard, a really excellent systematic review and meta-analysis that she carried out looking at the impacts, particularly of traffic-related pollution on disease. And we see here, particularly for mothers and children, there are significant impacts. The effects are there from conception onwards. So babies born too small, too soon in children, the onset of asthma, exacerbation of asthma, increase in respiratory tract infections, and so forth. And you can extend these adverse effects beyond the respiratory system, as we've heard, to, for example, delayed cognitive development in children. So it's a serious problem, as we've heard already. Let's talk about vulnerable populations as well. And I've just put two slides to summarize this. This is a rather neat diagram on the left from the city of Bradford, and it illustrates how the most disadvantaged people live in the most polluted areas. So you can see the white dots are where the most disadvantaged people are living within Bradford, and the darker green areas are where there are the greatest environmental threats to health, particularly air pollution. The graph on the right, I think, summarizes the effects on vulnerable populations particularly powerfully. Now, this is data from the States. It's from a paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2017. And this is an analysis of over 60,000 Medicaid patients in the States. Now, the data is pretty similar for the UK, but I think this slide shows it particularly well. And you can see the line, dotted line along the bottom represents the overall population studied. And up the left-hand side, the y-axis, it's the risk of death for an increase of 10 micrograms per meter cubed of PM2.5. And I've highlighted with this red square the ethnic groups in whom the risk is greater than the overall population, and in particular is greater than the white population. And you can see that for the black people in this study, there's the greatest increase in risk of death, but also for Asian, Hispanic, and Native American populations as well. And of course, this links back to poor Ella, surely the person who polluted the least and yet suffered the most. So moving on, I too met Frank Kelly a long time ago, and that really was a moment that spawned a lot of this work. So back in 2019, we published a paper where we had evaluated the impacts of London's first low emission zone introduced in 2008. Now, this was not a well-funded study. It was done on a shoestring. And we looked for an impact of air quality improvements from the first low emission zone on children's health. We didn't find it, and that low emission zone did not have a big impact on air quality. But what we did find was that children that had been exposed to the highest levels of pollution in East London, this was 2,400 primary school children that we studied in East London, the children that had been exposed to the most pollution had the smallest lungs. So there was impairment of lung capacity, stunted lungs. This was picked up by the BBC and lots of other news outlets. Pollution linked to stunted lung capacity in London school children. And that gained a lot of traction, not only with parents who understandably thought this was a dreadful state of affairs, but also with Sadiq Khan, who used this as a major justification for the introduction of an aggressive ultra low emission zone. So why is this stunted lung capacity important? Well, this is a slide from the work of Eric Mellon, who leads another children's cohort in Sweden. And what it shows is, along the bottom is the life course from 0 to 90 years. And up the y-axis, we have the percentage of expected lung capacity achieved. And so by the age of 25, lung capacity reaches its peak. And after that point, it gradually deteriorates, and it can deteriorate faster if there are continued insults. But the bit that we're particularly interested in is the time between birth and adolescence and early adulthood. And the CHILL study particularly focuses on primary school children. And the particular trajectory that we're interested in is what's called growth failure. So children whose lungs start growing and they expand and expand and expand, but they don't reach the peak that is expected. And so they enter adulthood with small lungs, which is a major issue, because if you have small lungs entering adulthood, then your lungs are already declining in relation to the volume that they should have been. And this is associated with risks of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, but also, curiously, metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease, but particularly premature mortality as well. So the question that we address really within the children's study is, can we do anything about this? Can we change this growth failure of children's lungs towards something which is less likely to have long-term impacts on their life and their disease and longevity? So, so on the basis of that, we put in a bid to NIHR, the National Institute for Health Research, and independent funding. We won independent funding to set up the CHILL cohorts. CHILL stands for Children's Health in London and Luton. And this is a comparison of the health of children in London and Luton. Our partner, Gert Randar from Luton Public Health, is in the audience. And it's been an absolute delight working with Gert over the last years. So this is a screen grab from the recruitment video to the study, which recruited just under 3,500 children, primary school children, from the epicenter of London, where the ultra-low emission zone was to be introduced, but also children in Luton. And we chose Luton because Luton is really an excellent comparator site. The demography of children in Luton is very similar to that of children in London, important when you're making a comparison. The mix of air pollutants is very similar in Luton to that in central London. The pollutant levels are not as high as in as London, but you can imagine that we're looking for a site that is comparable, and the existence of a comparator site is critical to the design of this study, which is unique, and we think one of the most robust designs to evaluate an intervention like the clean air zone. So this is a study design. We have Luton as the ultra low emission zone site, and Luton as a comparator site, as I've mentioned. The study team had to get up early and get themselves over to Luton, carry out all the kit, do the health assessments and so forth. So an enormous amount of work. The critical, one of the critical aspects of the study is that we recruited these children prior to the introduction of the ultra low emission zone in 2019. So we have baseline assessments before the zone was introduced. And then we did annual assessments. These are primarily, the most important assessment is spirometry, measuring highly accurate measurement of the lung function and capacity of these children. And those continued annually across the next four years. During that time, the ultra low emission zone was extended. So remember, we have half the children within central London and half the children in Luton, and they get annual assessments of their health. We measure pollutant exposures. These are not emissions, the pollution levels at the roadside. These are exposures. So these are modeled exposures based on the household for each child. So it's pretty much what children are breathing most of the time. And it's, I think, a more accurate measure than simply using roadside exposures. And at the end of the study, we link all the data together. Our hypothesis is that improvements in air quality consequent to ULEZ implementation would be associated with improved children's lung function growth trajectories. Now, this work is in review at the moment with the Lancet. We're responding to their comments. So I'm not going to give you detailed charts, but I'm going to explain what we found in the study. So this is what we did: the large prospective control cohort evaluation, the impact of the world's largest clean air zone on children's lung development. So what did we find? A minute, good, okay, sorry. Yeah. So what did we find? We found that at the beginning, children's lung capacity in London was less than those in Luton, just as we predict from the original research. We saw rapid improvement in air quality in London, particularly nitrogen dioxide. We saw that the lung growth was strongly related to those pollutant exposures. And we found that particularly, most importantly, lung growth in the children in London accelerated. And over the next 4 years, they had caught up. Their lung capacity had caught up and matched that of children in Luton. We found other aspects of the study reinforced the findings that there was an impact of the ultra low emission zone. Our findings are consistent with other cohorts in the world in California and Sweden. I think I'll leave it there because that's the essence of what I wanted to get over. Thank you.
We'll turn to our last speaker, Gregor Singer, who is Assistant Professorial Research Fellow at the Bradford Research Institute, where he co-leads the Economics of Air Pollution Group. So Gregor will talk to us about, well, the economic arguments. And the two quick questions are, what are the costs of inaction? How do they compare to the benefits of policies such as ULEZ? And how can this counter the narrative that clean air measures hinder growth?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I will talk a little bit about the economic case, and leaving the ethical issues aside, there's a really strong economic case for clean air policies. And from a public policy perspective, we usually think about cost benefits of policies when we think about whether they're worthwhile implementing. But in the public debate, often you hear about the cost of clean air policies. We need to buy new cars and all of these things. But really what's missing is that there's a really large hidden tax we're already paying in terms of health and productivity. So let me talk a little bit about the benefits and the costs. I'll start with the benefits, and we can really split this into two parts. The first part is how air quality itself maps into outcomes, but then also how policy maps into better air quality. So the first part, we have a lot of evidence. There is scientifically no doubt that air quality helps on a lot of dimensions we care about. We've heard a lot about the health dimensions already. And you know, when you extrapolate that to what it does to humans in the workforce, you can already see we have shorter lives, we have more sick days. The NHS is public funded, so there are large fiscal costs as well of air pollution. But apart from that, there are a lot of studies that look at economic outcomes directly of air pollution or better air quality. And you can really see it in all sectors of the economy. You have excellent studies looking at agricultural workers and showing that on polluted days, you have much lower output. You have excellent studies in the industrial sectors that for factory workers, you know, things like installing in an experimental setting, installing air purifiers in factory helps boost output. And you have evidence in the service sector, things like call center, financial industries, you can see that workers perform better with higher air quality. So there's really no doubt about this. And you know, you can also take it back sort of to the human capital formation years. There are a lot of evidence that human capital is impacted by air quality. So there are studies being run looking at exams, at test scores, and on polluted days, test scores are systematically lower. There are studies that looking at this at an experimental setting where you install air purifiers. You can actually run clean scientific experiments that show it really impacts test scores. So there's a lot of evidence, and this part of the benefit side is probably the clearer side. We already heard the number for the UK earlier in terms of what the economic costs are of air pollution. And in the US, it's about $800 billion per year. So now the trickier part is how do policies map into air quality? How effective are policies? And the reason why it's trickier is because from a sort of scientific perspective, it's much harder to evaluate policies. They don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in very specific places for very specific reasons, and many other things happen along the way. But a lot of effort has been made, we just heard about excellent studies trying to think about how we can evaluate these policies. And this is really crucial because they help us to think about how to design the policies. And what we heard earlier about London, for example, a lot of thought goes into what are potentially unintended consequences of these policies. There's an example from Mexico City from decades ago where there was a new policy which limited some days where you were not allowed to drive based on your vehicle license plate. So what happened is people bought secondary older cars, and sort of the policy in some ways even backfired, and you had no impact on pollution. So it's really critical when you think about the policies to really think those through. And I really liked hearing about how in London, this is really a trial and error process, also trying to learn from mistakes along the way. Now, let me briefly talk about the costs. So costs of air pollution policies are generally it's not free. There are things that may be very low cost, like information campaigns. Thinking about how can we provide information to people, for example, in London, we have a lot of domestic biomass burning, and that also causes a lot of indoor pollution. Maybe some information provision actually helps to nudge people to use these types of polluting heating less. But in general, to sort of bigger improvements, these policies are not free. So there are some costs to them. And what's really critical here is to think about who bears those costs. What are the equity and distributional implications? For example, in low emission zones, does this impact lower income households more? And again, what's really critical is to think about possible mitigation measures. So we heard about the scrappage scheme, for example. But the distributional implications are not only on the cost side, also on the benefit side. We've seen multiple graphs today that it's typically the more deprived areas that face higher air pollution. So as a result, policy that improves air quality tends to also benefit the more deprived areas relatively more. So let me conclude by saying that we need to look at the benefits to costs from a public policy perspective. And we don't want to regulate at all costs. But in the case of air quality, it's really clear that the benefits far outweigh the costs from an economic perspective, leaving the human rights issues aside. And in very recent literature, for example, looking at the US, looking at different areas in the US and trying to compare the costs and benefits, the benefit to cost ratio is 10 and more. So it's 10 times as beneficial as the costs are. And so finally, to your question, so what does it mean? Is there some trade-off between clean air and growth? It's definitely not a trade-off. Clean air really is an input to productivity and growth due to the health effects, but also the productivity effects. I'll stop there.
Out. So we've gone the full circle. It's not like talking to colleagues in the audience for your questions. We'll take a couple here and then we go. So.
My name's Simon Burkett, Clean Air in London. 20 years ago in April, I wrote my first letter to Ken Livingstone asking him to make the first phase of 9 of the low emission zone and upper low emission zone stronger and sooner. So there was a lot of time. I'd like to really congratulate the Special Rapporteur, Astrid, for her report and organise this event. And perhaps the Special Rapporteur would submit her report to the Environmental Audit Committee's inquiry on air pollution in England, which actually closes next Tuesday. I think would be extremely influential. Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
This is a question more for Debbie.
Please do introduce yourself.
My name is Ruth and I'm a parent of a child with asthma. On behalf of 40 million children in London who have asthma, what impact or next steps is the ELA planning to clean up capital care and on a pathway to long overdue World Health Organization?
Sorry, is it done? Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. It is a big challenge. One of the points I raised is around how we're able to demonstrate the huge difference the policies have already made, but also remembering that London still falls short of what the World Health Organization recognizes as, well, there are no safe levels of pollution, but what the target is. And our next steps in London is we currently have a study to understand what extra efforts, what extra interventions we can take in order to push forward to meeting that WHO targets. It is a significant piece of work, and again, emphasizing that a lot of our work has to be backed by data. And so we are currently undertaking an evaluation of what we've achieved so far and what else can be done to go even beyond meeting legal limits. We do hope to have some information to share with the general public later this year.
Well, it's not really a question, but thank you for that suggestion, Simon. And one of the challenges, of course, as a special rapporteur, is that our mandate is global. So my mandate is global, and there's so much happening. And so should I go closer? So submitting the report. I mean, the report is public, and in theory it should be used, and please use it now that it's public, but I will definitely, I'm happy to submit it to the inquiry that you mentioned. One other thing that I'm doing as rapporteur is whenever is possible is to participate in litigation, strategic litigation with amicus. And I am preparing one for South Africa for a case that is about clean air. My predecessor also participated in some, and that also helps for the understanding of how international law can be used. And I think that it's key, especially the link with human rights. One thing that it made me think also in terms of the question that I didn't say much, but it's key is the importance of the precautionary principle as well, and that whenever data is missing, or if there are some research, I was thinking not much about London, but in Mexico City where I live, and my kids' health, and in other places, including Delhi, and that's one of the things that I included in the report as well, that with international and even national research that there is, including here, what Chill shows, those scientific reports should be used and can be used as an important tool for cities and states to improve legislation. And so I really hope that that is being done.
Okay, we have a couple of online.
Well, we have one online question from Ralph Wills. It's a very long question, actually, but I'm just to cut to the chase. To whether and to what extent basically stricter MOT testing needs to be factored into combating air pollution in London?
We'll just take a couple. So the thing is, yeah.
Hello, my name is Ben Cave. I am at University of Liverpool and University of Birmingham in the Netherlands. I also work in health impact assessment. I was delighted to see the mention on and the prominence of health impact assessment in the Special Rapporteur's report, and especially the link between health and environmental impact assessment as well. And it's an observation, but I'd be interested in the thoughts of the panel as well, in that we have wonderful speakers. Astrid, you mentioned the importance of business as well. Impact assessment brings business into this discussion. And I think that's fantastically important. An impact assessment is a procedural way of working out, of scrutinizing and working out solutions in particular cases. And I'd be interested to hear more about how that can be turned into substantive action.
Oh, hello, my name is Rosamond, and for this purpose, I am Ella's mum. For me, it's always interesting, and Suzanne to clarify this, that the governments are well aware of all these research, etc. I personally believe the only thing they hear is litigation. Sorry to say for everyone in this room. So I am now more than convinced if Elliott's inquest hadn't happened, and I can now see why Siddiq supported it, ULAs wouldn't have happened. And going forward, I'd like to ask Astrid is how important is litigation going to be? Because if you look at the bigger picture and what Trump has done, or when I was walking on the street, someone said to me, "Oh, Rosamond, isn't it amazing that Vauxhall are now going to be, producing diesel vehicles again?" So for me, it's really interesting that all this information is out there and they won't listen. And my only hope, and I shall repeat this, because no doubt it will be repeated to someone in Vauxhall, is that I do hope diesel wins in court, and I believe that's the only way that's going to stop that. But it seems, I think Trump's thing is really interesting. And as Stephen Holgate was saying in Leeds, we can't pretend that the climate outset, the political climate, we can't ignore it. As in, the more people move towards the right, how this is impacting us. And I don't mind who answered this on the panel, that without litigation, without, I don't know, I mean, there's so much research out there, and there are so many people dying, and that does not seem to be the driving force. So what else needs to be? And what is going to take the public, by the way? Because, for instance, we know this government can do U-tests, and they've done about 14. No, I am living in hope. So on this particular matter, what would make the government do a U-turn? And I'm being very serious about that, because until we can discover what it is, we're going to keep on going, the research, but there is something, isn't there? If they've done 14 U-turns, why not this? And also, how are we going to go about getting the public on board to get that U-turn?
Maybe one more question before we go to some.
Thanks, Ashwick. Thanks, everyone. My name is Owen. I'm a PhD at the law school. I'm also really looking forward to reading the air pollution report and the Irish report, which I think is due out in 27. I think that's all. But my question is particularly for Astrid, and it's around turning the kind of recommendations into implementation and enforceability, and in particularly in the context, I suppose, of transboundary air pollution. So somewhere like Ireland, where you have one island with two jurisdictions, how do you manage that? And in particular, how do you kind of think about addressing air quality issues in countries that might have significantly less, financial capacity, resources to deal with those issues, and whether you thought about that in the context of implementing your report.
Should I start and then Jemima, you take the other one on the testing, or do you want to start?
I don't diesel. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll go quickly onto the question around MOTs, because I'm really excited and curious to see what will happen with the diesel scandal. What has happened, obviously, is that 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, it was revealed that loads and millions of cars were emitting much higher levels of emission than all the testing had shown that they would, because in fact, these cars are very likely to have been rigged to know when they were being tested. So they would emit low levels in testing scenarios and much higher levels when they're on the road. In the UK, the court case over this issue as a class civil action actually started again about a year ago, and Mums for Lungs got involved in it because this was an issue where the car companies that were being sued, many of the major car companies in this country, were trying to keep all the information disclosed. The other way around, they were trying to keep it secret, and claiming that there was business interest that should override the public interest in making the information public. And we got involved, and now a lot more information has been made public. It has been possible for the media to get involved. But I think that is only one side, and we will see and hear what happens in July. But I think the issue around the diesel scandals, or about MOTs, or about even the practice use of wood-burning stoves, the real problem is that there is often a testing regime which is frankly not rigorous enough. It's not good enough, and it is a testing regime in many scenarios that only is used within the testing regime. But when we come to pollutants of all sorts, whether that is cars, whether that is stoves or cookers or whatsoever, and probably in very many other environmental fields as well, what we really need is to ensure that we actually use the devices that are being tested the way they are being used in practice. It's very lovely to test something in a scenario that only works in that regulated scenario in lab, but it doesn't tell you the levels of pollution and harm it does in the real world. And I think that is my big appeal, and that's my sort of that's a big shortcoming of all sorts of testing scenarios, is that the labs don't show the realistic scenario of any usage and therefore pollutant. And that is a system and a framework we need to look at much more widely as civil society, as politicians, for the protection of public health.
Thank you. And I think that answer, it's a great connection to the other answer to the other questions. So I want to remind us all that when we talk about air pollution and climate change, biodiversity, the toxic pollution, of course, the solution to that is not small, painting different colors, the walls, or business as usual with a little bit of change, right? We need, as the IPCC has said already, we need profound and systemic changes. That's a reality. That's what the science says. Because when we talk about climate change, which is level of crisis, and air pollution and biodiversity, it's huge. And it's also a consequence of systemic discrimination, colonialism, and inequities. We see that. And so that is why we need to think about these big, important changes. Again, it's not a little bit of, as and I was, of course, looking to that, but Gregor mentioned, I live in Mexico City. These policies about, well, if you have a car, maybe you are not going to drive the car 1 day a week. And a lot of people bought, in Bogota, the same thing, 1 or 2 cars. And now it's like increasing motorcycles, etc. So anyway, I'm going in large there, but like really thinking about and advancing systemic changes that we need. We know, of course, and this is a great thing about, which is horrible, but air pollution is profoundly linked with climate change and with a dependency on fossil fuels. So this is the kind of things that we need to identify, and thinking about also the transboundary issues, right? We have now defacing of coal, at least in the UK, in Ireland. But there's also this wave of, oh, we can use now more natural gas, which we know that is also fossil fuel. So if we call it natural gas, we should talk about natural coal and natural oil, right? So that's, we have to be very careful about that change, which makes me, or land to this question about the health impact assessments. So the way that I see also the reports and my work is pieces of the same puzzle. So the Clean Air report, of course, talks about clean air and the link to human rights and health from this perspective. But the report that I did last was on environmental impact assessments. And it's a framework with a proposal to rename those as ESHRAs. So environmental, social, and human rights impact assessments, to include health impacts also, but to include the right to a healthy environment. It's unbelievable that still we have smelters or refineries or new ports, expansion of ports, and air quality is not an issue that is being considered. And in that sense, the science behind that. So that's what I'm trying to do from the mandate, to have a more comprehensive assessment of this, and of course, planning. Rosman, and we talk also about that political, I'm very aware about the political environment where we are living, and that's why we need to advance, of course, accountability. And we talk about businesses, there are businesses of all kinds. And as we know also, the impact on air pollution on a lot of businesses is huge. Farmers all around the world impacted by air pollution, but also ozone and droughts and floods, right? So that is something that I think we have to continue linking. And this is, to me, like my contribution from the mandate. One of the things that, legally speaking, I hope that, and I included in this report, and I really hope that we can use it a lot, is that in litigation, and hopefully, I mean, litigation, I think that is very important, but hopefully we do not have to do that. I was myself involved in the litigation on La Oroya, that is a city in Peru. It took 20 years to go to the final decision at the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, and yet it's not implemented. And so, and I also, I mean, there's families that were 5 people, now they're 2, like there were people died in the process. So hopefully we can be able to advance policies that are implemented. Legally, in this case, in La Oroya, and also the European Court on Human Rights, they have concluded that we have to, in extreme situations of air pollution, there has to be a shift of presumption, so that instead of asking victims to prove what is called the link between air pollution and their health and impacts, as what happened with Ella, that we need to change that presumption. And whenever we have extreme pollution, evidence of that, and the state knows about that, and the state didn't comply with obligations, then this shift should be changed. And then the state or businesses, by that matter, should have to be able to prove that whatever health impacts, even if it's deaths, but asthma linked, etc., was not because of air pollution. was not because of those pollution. And that is a kind of shifts in legal spaces that we need to have. And so, yeah, with this, I'm very aware of the time. I just want to profoundly thank you all. And I think that this event and the report is also the evidence how much we need to work together and how much I learned and how much we need to continue collaborating like this, because it's not easy, as we know. And this room is full of a lot of people that is doing everything that we can and more. And the importance also to connect with others and make sure that we're continuing collaborating. So thank you also.
Thank you very much.